really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks again, Maggie and Sanjeev, for letting me sort of co-opt, redirect our coaching circles for things. The whole point of these coaching circles is to share in community and help. And there's obviously a lot that's going on that's a challenge for folks in our ways of working. And so while we talk about a lot of these things in the coaching circles, really wanted to focus on things that we can very directly do to help support those of our friends who are looking for an opportunity. So we did the resume session, as Maggie had said last month. This is the second part of that. And I'm just going to jump right in. So thank you again all for being here. Please throw your questions, etc., in the chat. I'll try to answer them real time. If not, can follow up afterwards. With that, then we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So second part of our session, again, AI-powered career management for Agilists. So our first session, if you didn't see it, as Maggie had said, you can find this on YouTube, was about using generative AI to help with your resume. But again, there's a lot that's sort of either only generative AI and a lot of hype or a lot of fear. What I've tried to do in these sessions is practical, non-hyperbolic uses of these tools that help what we're doing, in this case specifically for interviewing. So from there, a little bit about me, and many of you know, I'm the VP of Consulting at LitheSpeed, but really what that means, I'm an educator, I'm a coach, I'm a consultant. I'm one of us, and I do this work every day. A lot of my experience, though, was not in consulting, was a senior leader with fancy titles. And I'm not trying to impress any of you by this. The reason that it matters, I think, in this context is that I was the hiring manager or manager of hiring managers in more than 10 different organizations, mostly Fortune 500, some AI startups and related, and many more divisions and departments. And so I've been in many interviews. This is not just an opinion on things. This is based on like literally thousands of interviews and hundreds of hires. I'm happy to share my experiences and observations, and hope that this will be helpful for those of you who are on this journey or who may be. That QR code is for my LinkedIn profile. So if we're not already connected, please feel free to connect. And if you don't have your phone handy, happy to connect after the fact. You can find me on LinkedIn, or Maggie, or I can throw the link in the chat, but please do connect. This is a community. So if you have your phone out, I'd like to do a very quick poll. For those who have been interviewing, what's your experience been so far? And thank you for that. QR code. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can Alt-tab with the best of them. Okay. We'll give it another minute or so. There we go. Thank you. I don't know who's responding or not, but I'll keep making it awkward until we get enough votes, and I think we're about critical mass. So we don't have a ton of responses yet, but this may be a realistic distribution for a number of us. Most folks are not actively applying or interviewing, but you're here, so that implies that you're curious about that, or that you think you may need to. I think it's a good habit anyway. 2 are actively applying and no interviews yet. If you get those interviews, I think when you get those interviews, more of what we'll talk about today will be applicable. If you're not getting interviews and you're applying a lot, the first session on the resumes, that might be useful. And again, as Maggie had mentioned, you can find that on YouTube on the LitheSpeed channel, but some thoughts about using generative AI to help your resume so that you do get those interviews. But today, and then actively interviewing, it's going well. That's great for the 2 of you. And then actively interviewing, it's not going well. So my not so secret with today is that everything that I share will at least is intended to be useful for all of you, regardless of where you are in your journey. So thank you for your response there. Let me get back to you. So some things that I'd like to and I'm going to jump right into here. Those of you who've been in these sessions with me before know I don't spend a ton of time on theory. For me, I like to have practical, tactical, actionable advice, and that's what I'm hoping to provide to all of you. So again, this is informed not with my hat as a consultant, but this is informed as my hat as a hiring leader and PL manager in these companies, and the things that I've seen that work well and not so well. So the first thing is, whether it's in person or remote, be prepared and professional. First impressions still and likely will always count. I said before the meeting for some of the people who were here for the coaching circle beforehand, I don't wear a pinstripe, blazer every day, and I'm not saying you should do that for every interview, but it sets a different tone than if I'm wearing my Metallica or Motorhead shirts, which I do wear, but I don't wear to coaching circles. Thank you for those of you who know the reference. Workplace norms and dress codes vary, but err on the side of caution. Um, in addition to that, always have available a copy of your resume for review and reference. I also, by the way, recommend paper. It's difficult if people see you on devices, they don't know what you're doing. So you may be looking at your resume, they may be thinking that you're checking Robinhood or Instagram or whatever else. So having a paper copy, I think, is quite helpful. Always have a copy of the posting for which you're applying, so that you can true back to that if there are questions or if you want to know what's most important. Always have notes and questions for the interviewers, and have key talking points to ensure you cover, especially if you get nervous. I speak a lot for a living. That's a big part of what I do. And I still have these notes when I speak at any type of event because I know that it's important to true back to those things. So it's really useful to have talking points available, but especially if you get nervous in these situations. For remote interviews, a couple of other things I would strongly suggest. Even though it's remote, dress professionally and otherwise present yourself as if you were interviewing from an office. Ensure that you're in a well-lit, quiet space with no distractions. When I was interviewing folks, and COVID was a difficult time, but even years into that, I had people in interviews where they just have people walking right behind them in the middle of the interview. You wouldn't do that in an office. Don't do it at home. It just sends the wrong note about a level of professionalism. Double check your internet connection, webcam, and audio, and pre-install video conferencing clients. At this point in 2025, this is less of an issue, but I've had interviews that were 10 to 15 minutes late because somebody couldn't install the right version of the client to use that particular software. And I see some nodding heads in affirmation. So again, just be prepared. For agile leaders, and this is where what we do, our vocation, our chosen path, there are some things that I think are really important for us to think about in the interviewing process. Coaches, scrum masters, ADLs, product and project managers can expect some questions, obviously, specifically related to those roles. I always caution, especially when talking with a lot of scrum masters and coaches, these are fairly new constructs. Everyone knows what a PM is, but a scrum master is still a new construct for a lot of HR departments. So many interviewers will have less experience or knowledge than you in a lot of these areas of an agile ways of working. Ensure that you can answer your questions accurately and clearly, but provide context and, again, audience appropriate language tailored to your interviewers. If you're interviewing with an HR associate who's been in that job for a year and they're a generalist, they're not going to understand a lot about sprints or, backlog refinement or those sorts of things, or velocity. So you can still talk about things that you've done, but use language that is oriented towards your audience. When you interview, expect any combination of theoretical, my least favorite, but still quite popular, book knowledge type questions. What's the current Scrum guidance on team size, or who's a developer in Scrum? I'm not a fan of these, but I'm also not your interviewer, so you should be prepared for them. There are people who still like to debate whether it's a Scrum team is 7 plus or minus 2 or around 10. And for those of you who know the differences on that, congratulations. Those are two specific constructs. But somebody may ask you that. I think they're immaterial. I'm also not a big fan of, but you will likely get hypothetical questions, future looking. Same challenge I have with these. You just have to be prepared for what would you do. And I also don't really like the brain teaser questions, but you may often get those. There's some benefits to these. The famous Microsoft one, why are manhole covers round? They're designed to understand how you think through a complex problem where you don't have the data to answer the question. So you can expect those. I think sometimes they're interesting, but I think sometimes they're sort of distracting. The ones that I like, and I think more interviewers are moving towards this, but you should be prepared for all of them, are empirically based questions. How did you do something? That's the best way to assess your ability to do something in the future, is something like that you've done in the past. So those are the ones that I focus on, but you could get any combination of those, and you should be prepared for any combination of those. You also may get some philosophical or preferential questions like, what's your preferred scaling model? I ask these sometimes not for philosophical reasons, but I like to understand the why behind it. So this is my first question like that, and then my question will be why. So there's no right or wrong answer, but I do want to understand the thought process behind that. That gives me an idea about how people think. So those are some key considerations in interviewing approaches that you should expect. And again, I would plan for all of them. It's been a while since I've interviewed, but when I did plan for all of them. And it's really just important to know that depending on your interviewer, you get one or any of those. When you're interviewing, again, those are the sorts of questions, common formats for interviews. If you haven't interviewed for a while, or if you haven't interviewed extensively, one-on-one interview with a recruiter or a HR staff member. So like what I was talking about earlier, your first pre-screen often is somebody who is not involved in the work that we do at all. So you should be prepared for those conversations. And also, again, like on the prior slide, be aware that those individuals don't have the same level of experience, background, or knowledge. So we want to be thoughtful about how we communicate in those interviews, knowing who the audience is and their role. One-on-one with the hiring manager, they often are doing this to assess skills and fit from a leadership perspective. Good agile leaders especially are going to say, not just can you do the job, do you have the skills? How do you interact with other individuals? Will you be a good fit for our team to be more than the sum of its parts? A good agile leader will always be looking for that. A team or panel interview, so multiple individuals simultaneously, often with different roles within the team. So could be technical leaders, could be product owners, could be anybody in that ecosystem. And they're often assessing multiple things at the same time: your technical abilities, your knowledge of agile ways of working, how you interact, how you communicate. So those ones, you'll likely get a combination of intentions from those interviewers in the panel interview. And then a technical interview, and that will be probably less, at least in terms of pure technical. Most of you likely won't be interviewing for purely technical roles, but if you are in a role where there's an expectation of a technical background, where your experience in technology, specifically hands-on work or architecture or those similar types of roles, they may ask some specific questions, maybe not a whiteboard exercise, but to understand how you work through problems and watch you do that real time. And that can be really complicating. I had one person on a whiteboard just look at me after being really frustrated and drop the dry erase pen, said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this," and left and never came back. So they can be really overwhelming, and sometimes people use those to see how you behave under pressure, because these roles often have pressure. So today, I don't know of anybody who only has one interview, so I would be prepared for all of these sorts of interviews. Just expect any combination of these, but it's highly likely that when you get that interview, the first one is not going to be the last one, and you'll have some combination of these. I'll go really quickly in the interest of time, but for those of you who were interviewing, is anyone want to raise your hand just really quickly about what interview formats you have participated in so far? Online coding type of assessment. Okay, that's interesting. So if you're in those technical roles, a pre-screen to get your technical abilities proven, that makes a lot of sense for a lot of these roles if you're doing hands-on technical work. And then Linda, pretty standard interviews, nothing unknown. Okay, good. Thank you. So some sample questions, again, especially for those of you in those agile focused roles. Tell me about a time when you had to deal with conflict within the team. What was the issue and how was it resolved? How have you handled dealing with a backlog from scratch for a new project or product or release? I like this one as an example. I won't go in detail in the interest of time on all of these questions. But again, I want to know if you're going to be a product owner, if you've inherited somebody else's backlog and you're iteratively improving it. That's not bad, but it's a lot different than if you've created a new product from scratch and you know how to actually prioritize to build a backlog from zero. That gives me an idea about what you've done. What you've done, again, gives me a good idea about what you were able to do. What's been your preferred approach to scaling and synchronizing work across teams? So most organizations are going to want somebody who's not just at the team level. So how do you scale? Not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but if you say I've never done any scaling, that's going to exempt you from being considered for a lot of roles. Recent failure or mistake you made with working with a team. We want people to self-reflect. So those are the sorts of questions that I like to ask. Everyone makes mistakes. I want to know not that you made a mistake, but how did you respond to that? How did you recover? Did you take responsibility? Do you make the same mistake over and over again? Did somebody else have to fix it? Those sorts of questions. What's one area of focus and learning that you're actively working on as far as agile ways of working? I want to know that you're continuing to learn and grow. Some questions around estimation, not that it's good or bad, sort of depends on context. I want to know if you do, why? And if you don't, why not? I have more questions about working with teams, customers, and executive leadership. I keep these intentionally broad, by the way, so that people can interpret them and answer them in the way that they've interpreted that particular question. But I really avoid yes, no type questions. I really want them to have the ability to be as broad as they need to, and their answer tells me a lot about what they think and how they approach these problems. Key reports, charts, and tools. I want to know that you're using metrics to guide work. That is almost a knockout question for, I would say, a large number of folks I've worked with in agile roles that cannot speak to anything other than velocity reports on how they assess quantitatively the progress of the teams. And then when you've helped a new team start on agile ways of working, talk about an instance where you use Kanban, another with Scrum. Why did you choose each option? Again, what I want to know is not just do you have a bunch of certifications, but how do you know which tools from your toolbox to choose and to not choose them blindly? What's the context? Because it's all about what the right tool is at the right moment for the right context. So those are some of the questions I ask. They're questions you're likely to get asked. Some common interview patterns to avoid. And these are all, I regret to tell you, based on real world things. Not that any of you would do these, but other human beings have in interviews with me. None of these are made up, I regret to say. Being unprepared. If you're unable to speak to items on your resume in clear and accurate terms, that's going to be a problem. If it's on your resume, it's fair game. Even worse, and I've had this happen in a couple of instances when I've asked for a specific, asked a question about some details for a specific line item related to an implementation of something, the use of a tool, etc. That in the interview, the interviewee will say, well, I didn't actually really use it. We were just getting started. If it's on your resume, it's fair game. Don't exaggerate. Just focus on the things you do well and be clear about those. But you will ultimately get caught. It's really not helpful for anybody, whether it's conscious or otherwise. Don't sell beyond what you've got, because I'm sure what you've done is worthy of sharing, but anything beyond that, if it comes out in the interview, and it will, is going to be messy. Trash talking, this is strange, but it happens where people will badmouth their prior employer. Just don't do it. Even if they're worthy of badmouthing, it's not the right time. It's not the right place. Lack of self-reflection. So again, you saw one of the questions that I ask every single time, but especially in agile-based roles, we're leading by example. If we can't talk about, not that we've ran out of funding, but when we personally were the cause of a failure, right? It was an unforced error. We made a mistake. I make them every single day. But I self-reflect, and we want people that self-reflect and talk about what they do differently from that learning. And if people can't acknowledge making big mistakes and what they did about them that was exactly their fault, 100%, I'm uncomfortable with their ability to self-reflect or to be honest about the fact that they are. Both of those are deal breakers for me, especially for agile leaders. Relatedly, poor communication skills. Sometimes people would avoid answering the question that I've asked. Provide unclear, inaccurate, incomplete, or meandering responses to questions posed. That's just really problematic. We want to really be to the point. We want to make sure we understand the request, the question from the interviewer, and then hit that directly. Nothing more, nothing less in most cases. Negative body language. This is one that's really important to pay attention to. Whether it's remote or in person, if you see this, if you see, with my watch I went to put on, but if you see this, any of these sorts of things, those are really obvious. But some other things that you'll see when you're answering a question is something like that. Be attuned to when people are not understanding what you're saying or skeptical about it. That's really important. I'll talk a little bit more about body language. And then finally, unprofessional behavior. Again, I'm older than a lot of folks, and I've been around for a while. So some of these things may change generationally or in different types of organizations. But again, err on the side of caution. Um, Dress appropriately and level up. If you're not sure, go to one level a little bit more formal. Never show up late. Make sure that there's additional time, remote or otherwise. I'm not a fan of non-professional related conversations and interviews. It's just too easy to cross that line unintentionally. Really focus on work-related efforts and less on anything personal. Inappropriate language. I think I've had a couple of people drop some four-letter words in the middle. Not the right time or place. People checking their phone or computer notifications during the interview. Again, print out your resume, because if we're interviewing and I'm seeing this, I don't know what you've got going on with this. All I know is there's a high possibility you're distracted and focusing on something else. That is an interview ending exercise for me. So not everybody would be like that, but you really want to be thoughtful about how what you're doing verbally and non-verbally is coming across to the audience. So we want to avoid those anti-patterns. So preparing for the interview. So there's some things that you can do. I'm using Claude in this example. For those of you who will notice that I'm bouncing between different generative AI tools, that's by design. Some can be more effective than others, but you can use any of these tools. So don't let that be an obstacle in terms of which tool that you choose. This is from the second half of our prior session where I actually went through this process with Claude. And I created a project in Claude for job hunting, interviewing, and career pathing. Perplexity and other tools have that same ability with spaces or I think projects now in ChatGPT. But there's a way to actually consolidate all of these things. I'd highly recommend, if you're on this journey and you're actively interviewing, set up a space for that just for organization. But in this instance, I have a lot of that context already in that conversation and in that Claude project. And so now from that, I had to create a targeted resume. In this instance, I got that interview here. So I ask, I've received an invitation for an interview with a recruiter for this role. What questions should I ask? And what can I use for my resume? Again, it has my specific resume tailored to this job in context. So I'm being very specific. I can use it for this interview prep, and I can say, what can I do for this specific interview? Again, that's where generative AI can be really helpful, is very, very, very specific advice. So I ask what questions I should ask, what I can use for my resume specifically to be prepared. They're, again, specific, and interviewers want that specificity. If you can talk about what they have in their posting and bind directly to that explicit need they've identified, that telegraphs a lot of really good things to the interviewers, and generative AI makes this viable at scale. For some of us in the community, maybe we're a Scrum Master, or like when Cap One cut, I think, all of the Agile delivery leads a year and a half ago, whenever that was. Some folks need to go into a new role. That's just going to be the reality. So generative AI tools, if you're going to be interviewing for a new role, this actually can also be very helpful. So if I'm a Scrum Master and I'm looking to transition into a product owner role, I've got the CSPO, I get the basics of product ownership and management. But if I'm going to be interviewing, are there some things that I can do to help me be better prepared for transitioning into that role for my career pathing, but also things that I can do while I'm trying to get these interviews, when I'm getting these interviews? What can I do to make sure I'm best prepared for a role that I haven't had yet? So this custom GPT is one, honestly, that I created specifically for this series to try to help my friends and network going through this process. It's on Chat GPT, OpenAI. You can now access this for free, so you can give it a try. But I've got some examples there. It's just Agile Career Coach, and it's just for this purpose. But they can be really helpful. That one in particular is specific about Agile ways of working and product as well. So it can be more tailored and specific to the roles that we'll all be in. But I've asked it here in this tool, specifically in this specific custom GPT, about what I can do to get ready for the interviewing and for the basically being ready for that role. And it'll give me some very specific advice that leverages what I already know as a Scrum Master and based on my CSPO and the basics of product ownership, and tells me next level with some level of specificity things that I should do. The other thing that's going to be really important given what the market looks like now, especially for those of us in agile ways of working, is how do we stand out from other applicants? So this market obviously is competitive in general, but especially, and again, for a lot of my friends in the DC area, I know there's just such strangeness that's happening in that overall area for a lot of roles. So how do we make sure when there are so many candidates that are available and applying that we can stand out in the best way? The job market is competitive. There's hundreds, if not thousands of applicants. How do I brainstorm ways? Again, specificity. This is where Gen AI can help us as a superpower. What specifically is in my resume bound to a specific role that I can use to show why I'm different? If I've got that interview, right? Some of you are interviewing, some of you are going to be interviewing. One of the best ways you can stack the deck in your favor is being incredibly specific about things you have done bound to very specific things in the posting that they have or the job description. That is how you can stand out, is by not being general. Context and the specificity is what's really valuable here. It knows about that role. It knows everything about what that posting is. It also knows a lot about me and my background as a CIO and CTO. Before I was doing consulting, I was able to do transformative work with my teams. Pointing that out in this particular role can be a net positive depending on who I'm competing against. The fact that I had that background for this very specific role can be very, very, very helpful. So let's see. So using generative AI for interviewing practice, you can use a preferred generative AI tool for practice with interview questions. That same tool that I had mentioned, the Agile Career Coach, will help you ensure that you are able to do a mock interview, again, based on your specific resume and that specific position. So in this particular one, I wanted a mock interview. I've attached my resume and I have pasted in a real world posting that I just randomly find stuff on LinkedIn. For these examples, I copied and I pasted the position below. It's the head of program management for Atlassian, makers of Jira and Confluence and other tools. And so I asked it to help me with a mock interview. Even if you've got other people, and I do recommend doing mock interviews with actual human beings, but this is really helpful. You can do it at any point in time, and it's a really valuable tool, especially to have different interviewing type personas. Again, for those of us, it may not seem like it, but I am, even though I do these talks a lot, I'm an introvert. I really like to have a lot of prep to get ready for conversations. It really is helpful for me to go through these things and get ready so that by the time I do the actual interview, I'm in a much better place as far as knowing what questions are likely to be thrown at me. Even if I don't get the same ones that I'd get in the mock interview, I've gone through that process, that initial anxiety that we all get. If you're not anxious going into an interview, by the way, even a little bit, you might be a little overconfident. We really want to go in there being thoughtful about the significance of that event and really being prepared to show up as our best self. So the following are some of the specific screen captures that I provided in that conversation. So I asked it to do this mock interview, and it jumps right in. And so it, again, is very specific based on your background. You're highly qualified. Let's play the role as if it's a panel interview focusing on leadership and strategic program management. So again, these are not generic questions. It's derived and summarized the key elements of what that role should be, specifically based on the Atlassian posting. And it's going to orient this mock interview specifically between the interplay between my resume and that posting. Now, I didn't ask for a panel interview, but if I did, obviously I'd get it. But if I wanted a one-on-one, if I wanted one with HR. So We can ideate, we can experiment through those different roles. So if you want to know what it's like going through an entry level human resources associate and their questions, or an expert technical leader, CTO of the organization, or chief architect, whatever that might be. If you have areas that you're thinking you may be weak in or just not ready for yet, use those personas proactively. If you're doing a technical interview and you haven't done one for a while, have it take on the persona of a chief architect or similar role, whatever that looks like. But have it specifically preemptively focused on the areas where you feel like you might need that support. So here's my answer. So hiring manager, John, thanks for joining us today. Given your extensive experience leading enterprise transformations and PMO organizations, could you walk us through a situation where you had to align a large cross-functional portfolio of programs with strategic organizational objectives? What approach did you take and what was the outcome? And then it asked me to go ahead and answer as I would in a real interview. And I typed my message there. So it's my pleasure. I answered just as if I was talking to one of you who was interviewing me. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to be in conversation with you and the team today. Panel interview regarding a specific instance. And then I start going through those specific items there in terms of being in this prior role and answering their question. So there's the rest of my answer there. You can see I had about a paragraph. And again, as somebody who's been doing interviews on both sides of the interviewing desk for decades, I was quite impressed by this, and I do think that it is a really invaluable tool at this point. It said your response has a strong executive tone and highlights your leadership in aligning a complex portfolio with business strategy. It did correctly identify those strengths. I would agree with those things that it found and that those were important and significant. Again, not about me in general, but related specifically to that role and how my resume aligns to it, and then my answer. It also, though, identified one of the key things that I'm embarrassed. I know I'm being recorded and this will be shared broadly online everywhere. But even for me, I missed the part that I would have expected of somebody at this level to quantify it, right? So I mentioned quick new revenue, but I didn't talk about the specific revenue increases in this particular scenario. And I should have added, in this particular instance, new portal generated $1.2 million net new revenue month over month from the first month that it was launched. I should have added that in there. So this was great guidance. And now the next time I get a question like that, I'll proactively ensure that anything I talk about what I've done has a quantitative aspect to it. What was the impact of that work? So that was just the first response going back and forth in this mock interview. As somebody who's been on both sides of those interviews for decades, it taught me something I knew but needed to be reminded. That's, again, one of the benefits of this, is that it'll help us prepare even for things that we know. So some considerations before, during, and concluding the interview. Again, for remote interviews, always ensure that hardware, software, and connectivity are all functional. Whether remote or in person, ensure that you have within arm's reach a copy of the posting. Again, I highly recommend printing these things out. I know that's not for everybody, but I highly recommend having a copy of the posting available, preferably hard copy. Your resume, again, making sure you can speak to anything on it. If you can't, remove it. Any other reference material, and generative AI can help document and highlight and reference anything needed. Your experience and skills specifically aligned to the role's requirements. Again, you can use generative AI to generate your talking points for you based on these specific items and let it do the work for you. Specific talking points to raise. So using the tool, your own thoughts, or a combination of them, what are the things that you want to make sure you share, and or what are the things you want to make sure that you ask? Ask about the position itself, including growth opportunities and future paths available. I'll talk a little bit more about that on a subsequent slide. But an interview should be bi-directional. It's not just people asking us questions. We need to know about stability of the organization, how we can grow, etc. Wanting to know about the not just the department or the effort, but the entirety of the organization, including financial stability. And then about the team, including culture, structure, and any other related information. If we're going to make a decision that is related to how we will spend the vast majority of our waking hours, 5 days a week, we want to make sure that it's a place we want to be, not just a role that we want to be in. And related to that, compensation, benefits, schedule, and then especially more these days, this is more and more and more work from home or hybrid expectations. I mean, there's a lot of folks who literally cannot practically move. So needed to get those things understood in advance, because it may be a perfect position, but if you have to be in downtown DC and you're not commutable, that's going to be a challenge. So all of that before the interview, make sure that you've got your questions ready to go and that you're ready for the interview. During the interview, make sure that your questions align not only to Agile and Lean practices, but if we really care about Agile ways of working, we really also want to make sure that we're focused on the principles and values. We want to be talking about not just our outcomes in terms of velocity, but we want to talk about how we've had positive impacts within the team. When you're interviewing, we also want to showcase specific examples, even if you get a what if, those hypothetical situations. I'm a big fan, and I think this normally works quite well. You all can try this. If you get a how would you, you still can redirect it to a, well, when I was at X, we did Y related. So being able to talk about the fact that you've encountered that specific scenario before, not hypothetically, and how you've handled it, builds a great deal of confidence more than, if our velocity was just dropping, we would just ask everyone to work a little bit harder and better, right? Those are useless answers. We want to be able to talk about in the real world, when those scenarios have happened, how did we address it, right? We didn't, whatever that answer might be, if you've got a velocity related question or related scenario, most all of us have. But what did we do? Provide that context and talk about how you solve those problems. And that one in particular is a weird one, because velocity going down isn't always something that we immediately go in and try to fix. The velocity may go down for a number of reasons. So context really matters. But talking about your knowledge about why context matters for that question actually shows the interviewer that you really know your stuff. Again, always be mindful of that body language and tone in addition to what's being said verbally. And again, as mentioned before, if body language, tone, or their responses indicate lack of comprehension, or I'll just say comprehension, sometimes agreement, but if you're comfortable with this, and it can be awkward at first, but I have been to the point where I just say, I get the sense just based on body language that I may not have answered that question completely, or that there may be some questions on that. Is there something that I could say in addition? Could I reframe that? Could you rephrase the question? But I think it's important, you're in an interview, if you know it's going sideways, if you're comfortable with it, gently but directly ask, if you can restate that, or maybe you didn't understand the question. I found that can get you back on track sometimes, rather than just having the thing stay sideways and then never get that call back. But read the room, read that body language. In concluding the interview, offer any additional points to share. Again, that idea of having your talking points ready for the session. In some cases, you'll expect questions where you can showcase the things you've done, and they didn't ask a question that allowed the opportunity to talk to that thing. It's a two-way street. It's a bi-directional conversation. So if they weren't raised, you can raise those questions yourself and say, hey, we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I'd love to give you a little bit of information about my experience with X, Y, or Z related to what you had in the posting. That's a good opportunity, again, to remind them how detailed you were in looking at what they were looking for, and that you wanted to make sure that you were providing all of that information that they are curious about as far as their candidates aligned to that position. So if they don't ask it, you still have an opportunity to raise it. Assuming that you are interested, I probably should update this bullet point. Assuming that you're interested, you may be in an interview and be like, not for me. But if you are, confirm your interest in the role and your belief that you're a good match, preferably with specificity as to why, not just, hey, this was great, I think I'm a great fit. But again, that idea of those very specific points, maybe where you excel for specific things that other candidates might not, use that as another opportunity to remind them, to reinforce that fact that you bring something unique to the table or likely unique to the table. Remind them of that again in a succinct way, but it's another opportunity as you're confirming your interest of why you're a good fit. If it's not already on your list of questions, always ask for next steps and associated timing. It gets really awkward when people are just sitting and sort of waiting. So it is, most modern organizations will have a time frame for this and they will provide that to you. If they don't do it preemptively, ask. I also like to explicitly ask if anything else is required or requested of you. The answer is almost always no. But again, the fact that you're asking proactively if there's anything else you can do telegraphs a lot, consciously or unconsciously, to folks that you're conscientious, that you care about what you're doing, and that you're really thoughtful about being able to address or respond to these needs. It says a lot about you as a professional. So whether the answer is yes or no, you still win with that question. And always offer your thanks for the opportunity to interview, right? You're investing your time. These folks are investing their time as well. So even if it doesn't turn out well, everybody involved has invested some of their time. And I think it's really always appropriate to say thanks for the opportunity. At the conclusion of the interview, you can do that. You can also do that as a follow-up via email if you'd like. I think a follow-up email, a very short one, thanks again, is really helpful. If you get a follow-up interview, so that's after one or more of my interviews, but many of you are going to get a follow-up interview. The first one went well. Hey, we got another one. Back to generative AI and where it can help. So now I've got a follow-up interview. Maybe I did my first one with HR, the second one with the hiring manager. Now I'm going to do one with a hiring manager and the entirety of the team, including their current project managers. What should I do to prepare for the meeting? And it's always going to be likely that you will have more than one of these. So use whatever tool you like. This one, again, I bounce back to Claude. And this is related specifically for that context of that role that I was talking about, the PMO head role, in terms of what that role was looking for and the likelihood of those individuals from that team. So I've got specificity in context. So when I ask for the follow-up interview, it gives me some information. Research the company and project in its response, right? So it's giving me some specific, because I provided the context necessary for the good response. It's giving me a really good response as far as the SAP migration project. So this posting for this PMO head role specifically talked about SAP. And so it's giving me some very specific, not general, not generic guidance, very specific guidance. If I'm interviewing with these folks, including the PMs, I need to understand SAP and how it impacts the organization. It gives me some other guidance. Obviously, I only have a little bit in the screen capture here, but this will help me prepare based on those other roles. I want to know who is going to be there, because that's going to inform the likely questions of those individuals. And I want to make sure that I'm properly prepared. I also, if I know, I will put whether it's a technical, behavioral, or other type of interview. So if you know it's a panel interview, behavioral, whiteboard, whatever that case may be, provide that context as well, and you'll get very specific guidance from your tool as far as how you can properly prepare. The more detail, the better the response. As with all things generative AI, the more detail, the better quality response. So with that, some next steps. Some of this is from our last session. So if you weren't there, or even if you were, just as a reminder, the first step is really to get your resume in order. Have that base version of your resume fixed. Don't try to deal with a whole bunch of branches. We really want to fix the trunk, for those of you who think in terms of source code management, but let's fix the, Hitesh is at least smiling. So, but we really want to fix the core version of our resume and get it modernized, updated, all of that. And then once we have that, then we can start creating these specific versions. We want to make sure that the resume, again, you can speak to anything clearly and convincingly for anything that's on the resume, and then create those specific versions for the types of jobs that you're looking for. So you want to do these in order. There is an order of operations. But once you have that, again, you can have as many of these created by Gen AI as you need. And I would suggest for any role you're serious in, about applying to and wanting to be part of that interview process, create a specific version of that resume, not just for that role, but for that specific job posting. Consider asking a friend, coworker, or Gen AI to do mock interviews with you. Again, we went through that here. I really like both of them. The generative AI is wonderful for myriad reasons, including the examples I just showed you. But I still really love to have interviews, mock interviews with people that I know, trust, and appreciate their wisdom. Generative AI is not going to ever replace that, but it will certainly complement it, and I suggest doing both. Again, use your chosen generative AI tool for talking points, general questions, and notes. Always add the details to get the best quality outputs. Always have, I know I'm repeating this now for the third time, but it's really important. Always have a copy of your resume and posting immediately available.